For centuries, Europeans pulling bones from the floors of mountain caves believed they had found the remains of dragons. The skulls were enormous. The teeth were massive. The bones were thick enough to suggest something that walked the earth at a scale incompatible with any living animal they knew. Medieval apothecaries ground them into powder and sold them as medicine. Local legends built entire mythologies around the creatures that must have left such remains. The bones were real. The interpretation was wrong. What they had found, scattered across thousands of cave sites from Spain to the Ural Mountains, was Ursus speleus, the cave bear. And while the dragon interpretation was obviously mistaken, the instinct that produced it was not entirely wrong. There was something about these bones that suggested an animal outside normal categories. That instinct, as it turns out, was better science than it knew. Nothing about the cave bear was what it appeared to be. Start with the skull, because the skull is the first thing that separates Ursus speleus from every bear alive today, and the first thing that makes it look to an untrained eye like something from a different order of animal entirely. The cave bear's skull was steeply domed, not gently rounded the way a brown bear's skull rounds. Steeply, dramatically domed, rising sharply above the eye line to a cranial vault so pronounced it gives the animal an almost vertical forehead. The sagittal crest, the ridge of bone running along the top of the skull where the jaw muscles attach, was massive. Enormous muscle attachment points. A jaw apparatus built clearly for generating extraordinary crushing force. Everything about the skull reads as the skull of a hypercarnivore, an animal that ate large prey, that needed jaw muscles powerful enough to process bone, that was built for the kind of feeding that requires the heaviest dental equipment evolution can produce. The teeth tell a completely different story. The molars of Ursus speleus are high-crowned, heavily worn, with surface textures that show extensive processing of tough, abrasive, fibrous material. Not bone, not meat, plants. Specifically, the coarse silica-rich grasses and sedges and herbaceous vegetation of the Pleistocene alpine environment. Plants that wear teeth down in a specific pattern that no carnivore diet produces. The carnassial teeth, the shearing teeth that all members of the order Carnivora retain, and that even omnivorous bears use for processing meat, were reduced in the cave bear compared to its relatives. Reduced and partially functionless, in the way that structures reduce when selection stops maintaining them because they are no longer being used. The cave bear had the skull of something that should have been eating large prey, and the teeth of something that almost never did. This contradiction sat unresolved in the scientific literature for decades, argued over by researchers who found it difficult to accept that an animal of this size and apparent physical power had essentially given up meat. The current consensus, built from isotope analysis of cave bear collagen and the microscopic wear patterns on thousands of teeth from sites across Europe, is unambiguous. Ursus speleus was, in the dietary sense, more herbivorous than any living bear, more herbivorous than the giant panda, which supplements its bamboo diet with occasional animal protein. The cave bear ate plants, almost exclusively. The massive skull and the enormous jaw muscles were not built for killing. They were built for chewing, for processing the enormous volume of low-quality vegetation required to sustain an animal that could weigh over 1,000 pounds, 450 kilograms, through a growing season short enough that it spent nearly half its life in a state of metabolic suspension underground. Before the teeth, the size needs to sit in the sentence properly. Male cave bears reached weights of 880 to 1,100 pounds, 400 to 500 kilograms. The largest individuals may have approached 1,500 pounds, 680 kilograms. For comparison, the Kodiak bear, the largest living brown bear subspecies and one of the largest living land carnivores on Earth, reaches maximum weights of around 1,500 pounds, 680 kilograms, under exceptional conditions. The cave bear was, at its upper end, comparable to the largest bears alive today. But where the Kodiak achieves that size partly through salmon, partly through berries and roots, partly through whatever protein opportunity presents itself across a broad opportunistic diet, the cave bear achieved comparable or greater size, almost entirely through vegetation. It was the largest predominantly herbivorous land predator-built body plan in Pleistocene Europe. Nothing about that combination has a living equivalent. The caves. This is where the story of Ursus spelius becomes genuinely strange, and where the animal's name reveals how little it tells you about what the animal actually was. Because the name cave bear implies an animal that inhabited caves as its primary environment. The reality was simultaneously simpler and more remarkable. Ursus spelius did not live in caves the way the name implies. It did not make its home there permanently. It did not den there year-round, emerging to hunt in the surrounding landscape. The cave bear used caves for one specific purpose: hibernation. The same purpose that modern bears use dens, rock overhangs, and excavated hollows. The difference was scale, because the cave bear hibernated in vast numbers, in the same cave systems, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years. And because so many of them died during hibernation, their bones accumulated in those cave systems at densities that have no parallel in the fossil record of any other large mammal. The Drachenhole dragon cave near Mixnitz in Austria has yielded the remains of more than 30,000 individual cave bears from a single site. 30,000 individuals from one cave. That number requires a moment to absorb. 30,000 bears in a single mountain cave system. Accumulated across the tens of thousands of years the species used that site for hibernation. No other large mammal has left a comparable concentration of individuals in a single location anywhere in the fossil record. The Heinrichshole in Germany, the Veternica cave in Croatia, and the Ojo Guarena system in Spain. Cave site after cave site across Europe shows the same pattern. Thousands of cave bear individuals, bones covering cave floors in layers, skulls piled in chambers, bones wedged into crevices where dying animals crawled in their final moments. The accumulation of this many large animal remains in confined underground spaces over the tens of thousands of years the cave bear occupied these sites produced the bone deposits that medieval Europeans found so spectacular they could only interpret them as evidence of monsters. The deaths were not violent. They were quiet. Hibernation mortality. During a winter that was too long, or after a summer that did not provide enough food to build the fat reserves required to survive until spring, the cave bear simply did not wake up. It entered torpor in autumn, its heart rate dropping to as low as 8 beats per minute, its body temperature falling, its metabolism reducing to the absolute minimum required to sustain cellular function. And if the fat reserves ran out before the snow melted and the first vegetation emerged, the bear died underground in the dark, metabolizing itself until there was nothing left to metabolize. The bones of cave bear individuals that died this way show a specific signature: perimortem porosity, a thinning and weakening of the bone structure consistent with the severe nutritional depletion that occurs when a large body runs out of stored energy during torpor. They did not starve dramatically. They faded, and the caves kept them, generation after generation, in the dark. There is something preserved in the teeth that no other fossil evidence captures in quite the same way: hibernation lines. In the enamel of cave bear teeth, researchers have identified annual growth rings, similar to the rings in a tree trunk, that record the physiological stress of each winter hibernation as a distinct band in the enamel structure. By counting these bands and measuring their thickness, it is possible to read from a single cave bear tooth how many winters that individual survived, how severe each hibernation season was in terms of nutritional stress, and, in some cases, the approximate age at which the animal died. The teeth are a diary, written in enamel, recording the rhythm of a life organized entirely around the cycle of summer abundance and winter survival, year by year, until the year the bear did not emerge. Neanderthals knew the cave bear. This is not inference, it is carved into bone and pressed into the archaeological record at dozens of sites across Europe. Cave bear teeth perforated for suspension as pendants. Cave bear claws found in Neanderthal burial contexts. Cave bear skulls arranged in ways that have no explanation rooted in subsistence behavior, placed in specific positions in caves that Neanderthals also occupied, in patterns that suggest the kind of intentional arrangement that implies symbolic meaning. The site of Drachenloch in Switzerland, at an altitude of 8,060 feet, 2,450 meters in the Alps, produced a stone chest built by Neanderthals containing cave bear skulls arranged with the long bones of cave bears placed through the cheekbones. Whether this represents ritual, trophy behavior, or something else entirely is debated. What is not debated is that Neanderthals were paying specific attention to cave bears in ways that went beyond eating them. These were not simply prey animals. They were something the Neanderthals found significant enough to carry up a mountain and arrange in the dark. The competition for caves between Ursus spelius and the hominins that share its range was real, ongoing, and occasionally violent. And it operated on terms that the cave bear, for all its size, could not win in the long run. Cave sites that preserve both cave bear bones and Neanderthal artifacts show evidence of sequential occupation, bears using a cave in winter, Neanderthals using it at other times of year, both avoiding direct confrontation with a 1,000-pound, 450-kilogram animal that, herbivorous as it was, would have been extraordinarily dangerous when cornered or threatened. There is evidence from some sites of Neanderthals hunting cave bears, butchery marks on bones, cut marks in patterns consistent with hide removal and meat processing. Not frequently, not as a dietary staple, occasionally, perhaps opportunistically taking animals weakened by the end of hibernation or juveniles separated from adults. A healthy male cave bear was not prey that any hominin with a spear could approach without accepting a very high probability of a catastrophic outcome. Modern humans arrived in Europe approximately 45,000 years ago, carrying tools, social coordination, and a flexibility of behavior that no other predator in European history had brought with them. The cave bear was already present and had been for hundreds of thousands of years. For roughly 20,000 years, anatomically modern humans and cave bears shared the European landscape. The Chauvet Cave in France, containing some of the oldest cave art on Earth at 30,000 to 36,000 years of age, was also a cave bear site. The cave bears used Chauvet for hibernation, leaving claw marks on the walls and bones on the floor. Before and after the humans who painted it used the cave for whatever purpose drove them underground with ochre and charcoal. The two species were not simply contemporaries. They were sharing the same physical spaces, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes sequentially, negotiating access to the caves that both required for different reasons. The extinction of Ursus spelius happened earlier than most Pleistocene megafauna extinctions. The cave bear was in significant decline by 30,000 years ago, and effectively extinct by approximately 24,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets advanced across Europe and reduced the alpine habitats the cave bear depended on to fragments. This timing makes the cave bear's extinction different from the pattern seen in other Pleistocene megafauna. The horses and woolly rhinos and mammoths of Europe persisted for another 10,000 to 15,000 years after the cave bear was gone. The cave bear was the first of the great Pleistocene mammals of Europe to disappear, and it disappeared during an intensification of cold rather than at the warming that ended the Ice Age. Why? This is the question that the fossil record has not yet answered cleanly. Climate is part of it. The last glacial maximum compressed the alpine grasslands and herb-rich meadows the cave bear depended on into smaller and smaller refugia. An animal already living close to the margin of its caloric needs, already losing individuals every winter to hibernation starvation, would be pushed further toward that margin by the contraction of its food supply. Population sizes declined. Genetic diversity narrowed. The bear became more vulnerable to any additional pressure. Ancient DNA extracted from cave bear specimens spanning the last 50,000 years of the species' existence shows the genetic narrowing in real time. Population sizes that had been stable across interglacials, through previous climate shifts, began declining sharply around 35,000 years ago. The timing corresponds to the intensification of human presence in Europe, not to a climate event with no prior parallel. Population bottlenecks, reduced diversity, the signature of a species contracting towards its final range, and alongside that contraction, the growing presence of modern humans, who are not hunting cave bears as a primary prey, but who are competing for the caves themselves. A species that requires specific cave environments for winter survival, that has used the same cave systems for hundreds of thousands of years, cannot simply relocate when those caves are occupied. The caves were not interchangeable. The same caves, used generation after generation, warm enough, deep enough, reliably safe enough to survive winter. When those caves became contested, the bear that cannot fight a coordinated group of weapon-using hominins for access to the only shelter it knows how to use was a bear that did not wake up in spring. What the cave floors preserved across Europe is extraordinary in its detail and its sadness in equal measure. The bones of animals that died in the dark, alone, in the deepest chambers of cave systems they had used for thousands of generations, in a winter that turned out to be their last. Cubs alongside adults, young bears that did not yet have enough body mass to survive the full hibernation period, alongside old bears whose teeth showed decades of summer feeding and winter survival. Whole populations in some cases, preserved in a single cave, the accumulated dead of a lineage that ended not with a dramatic extinction event, but with a winter that never released them. Ursus spelius had been a distinct species for approximately 1.2 million years. It had survived the climate fluctuations of the entire Pleistocene, navigating ice ages and interglacials that transformed the European landscape repeatedly. It had coexisted with cave lions, cave hyenas, woolly rhinoceroses, woolly mammoths, and 2 species of hominin. It had developed a life strategy of such precise calibration to its specific environment, the alpine and subalpine caves of Europe, the herb-rich meadows of the interglacial periods, the specific rhythm of summer accumulation and winter survival, that it worked for over 1 million years without significant modification. And then, in a few thousand years, the combination of the deepest cold of the last glacial period and the expanding presence of a species that used the same caves for different purposes proved to be the combination it had no adaptation for. The dragon bones that medieval Europeans ground into powder and sold as medicine from apothecary shelves in a dozen countries were this animal. The enormous skulls that inspired legends of underground monsters across the folklore of Central Europe were this animal. The bones that confused naturalists for centuries before anyone understood what they were looking at were this animal. The skulls arranged by Neanderthals in mountain caves were this animal. The claw marks in the walls of Chauvet, running alongside the paintings of horses and lions and rhinoceroses, were left by this animal. It was everywhere in the European Pleistocene in such numbers that a single cave could accumulate 30,000 of its dead, and it was gone before the Ice Age ended, leaving nothing behind that walks the earth today. Nothing about it was normal. Not the herbivorous diet inside a skull built for a predator. Not the annual death toll from hibernation that filled cave floors with bones across a continent. Not the relationship with Neanderthals that went beyond predator and prey into something we still do not have a word for. Not the extinction that came earlier than every other great mammal of its time, in the deepest cold, rather than the warming that followed, for reasons that climate alone cannot fully explain. The caves are still there. The bones are still in them. In some cases, still being excavated, still being studied, still yielding information about an animal that has been gone for 24,000 years. The claw marks are still in the walls of Chauvet alongside the paintings. In the deepest chambers, where no daylight has ever reached and where the temperature has not changed in millennia, the impression of an enormous body pressed into a clay floor is still visible. An animal lying down for the last time, settling into the ground that would keep it, breathing more slowly, and then not at all. It did not die as a dragon. It died as what it was, something stranger and older and more precisely made than any legend gave it credit for. Something the ice kept in the dark for us, in fragments, until we were finally able to see it clearly. We are still learning what we are seeing.